Welcome to another episode of The Evaluation Couch, the podcast where we talk about career growth and the field of evaluation. I'm your host, Maria Montenegro. This episode includes themes that may be distressing or activating for some listeners, including topics of genocide, displacement, sexual assault, and intergenerational trauma. Please take care of yourself and listen to this episode when you're ready and when you have the right supports in place. For this second episode of the series for International Women's Month, I have the honor of having Doaa Abou Hussein, who is the co-founder of Kindred Purpose Consulting, here with us today to talk about being an entrepreneur, being a woman in this space, and leading with your values and leading with emotions. And I'm just so excited for this conversation and to learn from you, Doaa. As I've mentioned on LinkedIn and our connections, I have so much respect for everything you've done in your journey over the last year or so.
Thank you, Maria, for having me. And first off, I have to say that I personally am a huge fan of you. Your podcast has helped guide so much of what Kindred Purpose Consultants is and the courage that we have to be able to live out evaluation in a way that is aligned with our values and innovative. So thank you for giving us that space. I'm Doaa Abou Hussein. I'm a founder of Kindred Purpose Consultants, and we work with charities, nonprofits, and social enterprises around the world and in Canada as well to help them design and deliver initiatives that serve vulnerable and marginalized communities and to measure their impact along the way. And it's been quite a journey because we're actually around the 1 year mark. So in almost exactly a month, we turn 1 year old, and it's been quite a journey, quite an adventure. And I'm so grateful for every piece of it and everybody I've met along the way.
That's so exciting. First of all, congratulations. I know that Kindred is pretty new, and I've been on the sidelines just watching your growth and how you're leading this organization. I'd love for you to share with us what inspired Kindred Purpose Consultants and how did your personal values shape what your business is today?
Thank you. So this was a long time coming. I've known literally since my first job in evaluation that one day I want to start my own business, and I want it to be evaluation focused because what I really liked about evaluation was it's just so human centered. It's not research for the sake of research. It's research for the sake of problem solving, and it's for the sake of service and better serving communities. And when I heard the term social enterprise for the first time, it clicked for me because there is a way of doing business that is socially conscious, that is not just profit driven. And so the idea came to me back in 2019. And I knew for a long time I wanted to do this. And I kept on thinking, okay, how do I work towards this business? And what would the business focus on? And how would we serve communities? And which communities do we want to serve? And so it was a very long time coming. And I thought, if I'm serving communities, I need to make sure I'm fully equipped to serve communities with the skill set and know-how to be able to do this. And so I kept on working very strategically of what were the different skill sets I needed. And I would deliberately pursue the different jobs that would help me gain those skill sets. And by the way, through this, I also learned that evaluation that skill set is just so invaluable across a whole spectrum of things. I think I frequently engage with your posts on this because it intrigues me because a lot of people think evaluation is just conducting an evaluation from A to Z, methodology to report. But realistically, if you know how something works or what makes something work properly, you're able to reverse engineer that. And when you've done enough evaluations, you know what a successful initiative, an impactful initiative actually looks like. And so I started taking on jobs where I was designing programs, I was designing policies and regulations, and I was measuring their impact, and I was doing all of that kind of stuff. And so I took it from the full spectrum of evaluation and everything related to that. I knew I needed that skill set and I needed the leadership skill set if I wanted to start my own business. I was very fortunate in that my own leaders empowered me and entrusted me to become a leader. Even in evaluation, I was so privileged to have had such amazing teachers and managers and leaders who wanted me to grow and who gave me that space to grow. And so I went and I grew in the organization I was with. And then at a certain point, I realized I want to have an impact directly with communities. I didn't feel like I was having enough of an impact day to day. I felt so distant from the communities I really wanted to be serving. And I thought, let me start to get on the ground with communities. And so I joined the board of a Canadian charity that worked with Palestinian refugee students in Lebanon. And I immediately, as soon as I joined, I said it was a mature organization. It was almost 30 years old at that point, and it was trying to revive its activities and restart an old program. I said, before we restart this old program, let's go on the ground and do a proper needs assessment because the context has shifted so much post COVID, post economic catastrophe in Lebanon, quite frankly, and post Syrian refugee crisis. I went on the ground. I did a little bit of research from a distance, but within 10 days on the ground, I managed to engage with over 60 interviewees across nonprofits, across students, teachers, academics, like so many different actors on the ground. And I went to 6 of the 12 official refugee camps in Lebanon and some of the surrounding areas that are informal camps as well. And during that time, I realized I need to be on the ground more often. I need to be with
Mhm.
communities because I realized when you get the information immediately on the ground, you also carry a responsibility with you to act on it. It becomes your duty to make sure that this information is not just something that you take in an extractive way, but it becomes a reciprocal, let me make a difference here. And when you understand and people's problems and they entrust you with their problems, you have to give back. And that immediately solidified for me this is the kind of work I want to be doing. I want to
Mm.
work with organizations that are reaching the most vulnerable in our societies and actually uplifting them in a sustainable way and empowering those who are most vulnerable to have a much better life than what they currently have. And that for me was the catalyst that this is what I want to do. Eventually, my time with the board came to an end after a 2-year period. And by that time, I had also done a bit of consulting for private firms and I was ready. I knew that this
Mm.
was it. This was the time. I had all the skill sets. And on top of that, I have to say that I needed to finally have something for myself where I felt like I was waking up and living my values truly
Mm.
and unfiltered living my values. When you work for large organizations, it's very easy to feel a little bit censored in certain
Yeah.
aspects. And I didn't want that, especially when, to speak very clearly and explicitly about this, I was seeing my own people get slaughtered. I'm not Palestinian. My husband's Palestinian. My background's Egyptian. But we grow up as Arabs very connected to the Palestinian cause. As Arabs, we also know that what's been happening in Palestine for so many years since 1948 and before that, even, that could have happened to any one of the Arab countries. And if other catastrophes and genocides have happened around the world, including the Holocaust, it can quite literally happen anywhere, at any place, at any time, because of greed, because of colonialism, and because of extractivist policies. And I wanted to be able to talk about that, and I wanted to be able to live that and to use my voice and my brain to help change that landscape. When we were creating Kindred Purpose Consultants, we had a conversation from the very beginning about how do we live our values and is it okay to talk about Palestine, especially very publicly, because Palestine is just so connected to everything else from indigenous rights anywhere in the world to oppression to just every type of racism that there is. And we made a conscious decision that we are going to be very open about this. We are going to be an unapologetically pro Palestine business because if we don't stand up now, do we really have any values that we're holding on to? And if we don't have real values, then, what is our tether? What is our compass? And so we grounded ourselves in that, and that's what we've been doing ever since.
Wow, there's so much that you shared there. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that story, your motivation, what this has meant for you on a personal level, in a family level. I want to point out some things I just can't hold myself for the audience. One thing I loved about your story is that intentionality of knowing you were going to build this 7 years ago and taking your time, but choosing very selectively the roles and the skills that you were developing that all prepared you for this moment. I love that intentionality. The other aspect was your experience joining a board. Oftentimes, when I work with clients and we assess, are they having the impact that they want? One thing I always stress is it doesn't have to come from your job right away. it can be in your involvement. And I love that story of how your board involvement took you to the ground and just gave you this amazing aha moment that really solidified your path and the birth of Kindred Purpose Consulting. So I really appreciated that. And then the other aspect about your values and those bold, courageous choices you made from the very beginning that have really made your business stand out. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you here is I really want to learn more about those choices. I'm very curious. I know that in your website, you describe your business as being women-led and values-driven, and that's something you hold a lot of pride on. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means on the day-to-day practices and choices you make in your business?
Yeah, absolutely. We're women founded, and I think women tend to approach things a little bit differently. Women bring a level of compassion to the work, and it's not a softness that's weak, it's a tender heart that allows us, especially within the field of evaluation, to approach things very deliberately and carefully and mindfully of how we're affecting those that we're interacting with. I never do a very rigid interview ever because I am very mindful of the impact of what I'm saying on the emotional response on the interviewee. I think it's okay to show compassion in these. I never cross ethical boundaries on for research purposes, but it's okay to show, hey, I'm so sorry you went through this traumatic event. And that's an important thing because that creates safety, especially when you're working with vulnerable and marginalized communities. So, compassion is at the heart of building real trust and partnership to actually affect change. So that's the difference in approach. And I think we're really collaborative as a team and as an organization. And when we enter organizations as well as consultants, we don't enter them as these external people coming in, going out, and that's it. We enter them very much with a deliberate partnership approach. We're very transparent. We're like, let's work together. We're going to share everything along the way. So that has been just so instrumental for us of how we work with our clients, how we enter organizations, and how we work directly with communities. So women led from a partnership standpoint has been really important, but also from an internal perspective. You asked earlier about leadership, and I remember when we were starting out with Kindred Purpose Consultants, we very deliberately asked ourselves, what kind of leaders do we want to be? And what kind of leaders would we have needed at various points in our career? And that was something that we were so conscious of designing our organization to serve that. And when I engage with our team, and we're a growing team, like we have 7 or 8 associates at this point, and it's so amazing to have this growing team, but I don't take my team for granted. I want to nurture my team. I want to make sure that I'm spending time one-on-one with each of them too, to understand their needs, their challenges, their ambitions, and to also do a level of mentorship with them. So that has been just so important and equally rewarding for me as it may be helpful for them. And so it's a certain style that we do. And I think that has been really crucial to our success. Like, I don't have a single disengaged team member. I have a very motivated team who is just so driven and motivated to excel. And that's important because that was done by design to do that. The other thing too is that we were very deliberate in building our team to ensure that it has diverse voices, because Canada is a cultural mosaic and we pride ourselves on that. And when we're working with some of the most vulnerable and marginalized communities, we want to make sure that we are representing those voices. And where we have gaps, we recognize those gaps and we seek out those voices. For example, we were working with a client and there was one thing that required an Indigenous lens. And even though I have experience on Indigenous engagement, and I can say from certain perspectives, I am an expert on these issues. However, I did not want to put a stamp of approval that I am not authorized to give because I do not identify as Indigenous myself. And so I worked with an Indigenous colleague to ensure that perspective was thoroughly captured and well done and respectful. And so it's about empowering those around you as well. That's a huge part of living our values. One of our really important values as well is decoloniality. And what that means is that we are really mindful of the Indigenous peoples that are anywhere that we are working and whose lands and territories we work upon and who we work with. And we're so mindful of that because, I am seeing the impacts of colonialism in real time, the lasting impacts through my husband's family. And my husband's family was displaced in 1948. In my husband's case, he's 3 generations down from the displacement. That displacement still has an impact. And so when I think about Indigenous peoples in Canada and the centuries of displacement, the centuries of inequality, the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, we're very mindful of this is happening in real time, but it also happened before and continues to happen in real time, even in Canada.
Mhm.
And we just want to make sure that we are working carefully and diligently to make sure we are empowering and actively working towards reconciliation in a day-to-day way. It is not an afterthought. It is built in truly through all of our practices and how we work and in how we engage with communities. So that's our values are just so incredibly important. And even in how we work with different clients and partners, I would say we vet our clients probably as much as they vet us. And we learned that the hard way. We very early on were approached by a potential client that was severely misaligned with our values. Actually, two in one day. We turned them both down. And even though the early startup days are very difficult, we just had to walk away from that because we could not compromise our values. Because if we started then, when does it stop?
Mhm.
And what do we hold ourselves to? And is it really who we are, falling into the profit driven side of things when we really truly are working towards becoming a fully fledged certified social enterprise? And that's important to us because we are social impact driven. So that's why our values are just so integral to every piece of who we are and how we work.
Thank you for sharing that. I think one aspect of what you shared, at least in Canada, is very well accepted. I would say not necessarily as a business, not necessarily a risky move to say we're committed to reconciliation, we're committed to being respectful with Indigenous communities. I would say in Canada, a pretty safe move to do as a business if it feels aligned with values. But the other very public stance you've made that is pro-Palestinian is different. And a lot of respect for you for still bringing that on and making those connections and how important that is. I'm very curious to learn about what has been the impact, the unintended consequences, positive and negative, of having that stance? And what has been your experience in holding that alignment with your values?
There is no negative consequence. I'm so happy to say that. And
Yeah.
so privileged as well, because there are so many people who have spoken out and lost their job because of that, who have spoken out and face serious consequences, which is a shame because you're essentially just saying, I am anti genocide, I am anti colonialism. That is it. You're not discriminating against anyone. You are purely saying these two supposedly universally acceptable statements of, I don't want innocent people to be killed, and I don't want people's land to be stolen. And that's it. We thought it would be a huge risk at first. And we held steadfast to that because it felt so important to who we are and our values. And we've been pleasantly surprised. We've had people approach us wanting to work with us. We've had so many values aligned clients, and we're so grateful for that. And we've had countless opportunities, and we've had those people who I never realized were pro-Palestine because, especially in the beginning on LinkedIn, people were pretty quiet about it and too afraid to post or engage. And I see them slowly build up the courage. And first they would message me and say, hey, I'm so proud of what you're doing. Thank you for being so openly pro-Palestine. And I didn't know, I've known these people for years, but I didn't realize that they were pro-Palestine. So that was a pleasant surprise. And then slowly I could see them build up the courage and then start engaging with the posts and start resharing or engaging more publicly with a comment or anything. And it was so fascinating to see that and to know there's a certain group of these phenomenal cheerleaders, I would say, who've been
Mhm.
with us from the start and increasingly engaging. And I think that's been a phenomenal reaction to see. And I do think quite honestly, we got it easy because when we started the company, the tides had started turning a little bit, and people were starting to recognize, oh my God, this is truly a genocide. UN is already saying most likely a genocide. Beware. So we were lucky in that sense, but still was early days, and especially to like brand a company as we are openly
Mhm.
pro-Palestinian. But we haven't had somebody say, we're not going to work with you because you're pro-Palestinian. And that's been a blessing. So, quite honestly, it's been the best thing because it's been a great filter for us, a natural built in filter of values alignment with various clients. It saved us a lot of time having to vet because if they've supported this, then we know that most likely they're aligned on other things. We still vet them, of course, because we want to make sure that thoroughly their values aligned. But it's been a blessing.
And I love the examples that you shared of how being public about this has also motivated others to say their where they stand, whereas perhaps before they felt scared and they felt afraid to do so. And oftentimes that's what it takes. It takes someone taking a stance to make it clear for others that it doesn't have to be this negative big thing that we understandably think it might be. So I really love that story. Though I'm very curious about there's something that you talked about in your website and your leadership and being a cornerstone of how you do business, which is emotional intelligence. And I love that being specifically called out because we don't really talk about emotional intelligence in trainings, in competency frameworks, but it's so important for everything we do. Would you be able to help explain a little bit of how emotional intelligence shows up in the context of your business and your evaluation practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just by the nature of the kinds of clients we take on, we tend to work a lot with really vulnerable individuals. So recently, for example, we've worked with a lot of clients who serve newcomer women. They can be recent immigrants, they can be refugees, and you don't know the background of potential trauma that they have. There's also a level of cultural nuance and sensitivity that needs to be reflected in how we engage with them. And it's from the very beginning. It starts from how you set up your methodology, even. And it's from everything from the methods that you want to use, which ones are going to be most accessible. And if you're constrained on something, so let's say you must absolutely do a survey because that is required that you do a survey. How are you structuring the survey so it is accessible and trauma informed and culturally sensitive in these cases? And it looks at everything from the plain language standpoint to the usability of the survey and how you engage with it. What I personally prefer are things like interviews or focus groups. And to me, that is where you've already filtered, like in the survey, as much as you can to protect the individual. You're trying to protect the respondent. But when you're engaging directly, one on one, or in a small group with this community, the responsibility is 100 times greater that you protect them. And I see the role of an evaluator isn't just to get information from them, it is also to protect them and protect their information. And I've had different organizations over time just say to me, we want all the transcripts. We want to be there. We want to be at the focus group. We want to do all of that. And I tell them quite literally, like in response to an RFP, I'm telling them, I will not allow you into a focus group. You will not get a transcript of an interview. You will not get everything aggregated. And I'm so protective of that because I want to make sure that when I'm engaging with people, I'm able to cultivate a relationship of trust for that time period. And that means that they need privacy and protection and assurance of confidentiality, that it's not going to be recorded. We actually never record, even with AI being great for transcription. We don't record, we do it in person. Like we do it manually on our end because we think it's just
Mm.
so important for confidentiality. And the other part of it is you need to be able to read the person in front of you when something is triggering, and you need to be able to pull away from it. There's no, like, we cannot create harm for the sake of answering a research question. That is deeply unethical. And there are different ways to pose questions so that you can get at something without hurting a person. And actually, a very recent example of that I encountered was my mother-in-law found out recently that she was in Lebanon during the 2006 war. And with current events, obviously, it's very triggering for her. And I was so curious and I wanted to learn more about her experience there. And I saw on her face that she just tensed up and it was too much for her and it was too triggering. And she's, I'd rather not talk about this. And for the rest of the family, they hadn't heard some of the details and they wanted to hear and they kept on pushing. And I just stopped them. I said, you know what? When she's ready, if she's ready, she will share. And that's what you have to do in evaluation as well. You need to sense when something is potentially very triggering for somebody, or a more complex and nuanced topic than you can adequately capture in that moment. And you need to know how to strike that balance of should you probe, should you not? And how do you ultimately ensure that you're closing off the engagement or the interview or whatever it is in a way that is still safe for the person that you've engaged with? I'm not going to leave somebody triggered and walk away. Especially experienced that when I was in Lebanon in the refugee camps interviewing students. There was one camp in particular that was on the border with Syria and a tiny camp. And may I actually delve into the story a little bit because I'd love for the world to hear about this camp.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. This camp is called El Jalil, and it's sometimes known by its French name of Wavell because it used to be a French military base under French colonialism, actually. And so it's right on the border between Lebanon and Syria. It's 1 kilometer squared, tiny. And essentially, because of the Palestinian refugee crisis in 1948, there was little space in Beirut and in southern Lebanon and other spots for them to put all the Palestinians. And so they took some of the Palestinians and they put them in this camp, and they essentially live in 200-year-old French military barracks and old stables for horses. These are not conditions for any human to live in. These are so incredibly old. They're made with lead. They're made with glass that has carcinogens in there. Like, it's to the point. And by the way, like, entire families live in a 10-foot by 10-foot room. That's it. An entire family that does not have a window. And because they live in essentially what the soldiers would have lived in the barracks. And they have a shared washroom outside that they have to step out into. It's almost like you're in a weird, outdated residence for a university, and a shared communal kitchen. And it's so dark in there that parents can't see their child. They have to take their child outside into the daylight to be able to see them. And I was given a tour of this camp by one of the partner organizations on the ground. And I was so fortunate that they allowed me so deeply into the camp to see it. And I remember my guide, she pointed out a grandmother, a mother, and a young son. And she said, those three all have colon cancer. And I was shocked. But like, how does a 3-year-old get colon cancer? And she said, it's because of the carcinogens in the glass and like the windows. And nobody's changed those. Nobody has renovated the place. Like, these are the kinds of communities where if you're coming in to ask a question about education, you need to be mindful that even before the education, the living conditions are unimaginable. The suffering is so deep and intergenerational. And when I was interviewing one of the students and she was talking to me about the difficulty of being half Palestinian and half Syrian and being fully undocumented in that camp and being trapped in that camp, she and her family could not leave that camp. If they left the camp, they would have been deported back to Syria. Syria was still unstable then, and her whole family would have gotten murdered. When you hear a story like that, and you're hearing about the trauma from before and the trauma during that life in the camp, the responsibility is huge. If you are a poker face in that moment with zero compassion, you lose the person, and you may have also risked the one chance at them having a safe space to fully talk about their experience. And that's why, for me, when you talk about emotional intelligence, it's so integral to every piece of what we do, because evaluation, it's an applied social science. It's an applied human-centric research. It's done for humans. And if we don't center the humans that we're trying to serve, why are we even doing this research?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing those stories. Helps really understand like where your heart is at and what has motivated you to be on the path that you are at now. I would really appreciate having the opportunity of hearing about your stories. I think in the way that you're describing it, emotional intelligence is, as you said, really about centering the human in your evaluation practice. It also sounds like the work you've done and the work that Kindred Purpose Consulting does is intentionally with marginalized groups, and that it would be unexpected experience to see, as you said, this level of suffering in many of the projects that you work on. How does emotional intelligence show up in how you take care of yourself and your team as they navigate these experiences?
Honestly, it helps to work in a team. When I did the work in the refugee camps in Lebanon, and especially like I wrapped that up I returned from Lebanon actually early August 2023. October 7th, 2023 happened less than 2 months after my return. That was mentally catastrophic for me, especially, by the way, because the refugee camps in Lebanon are like a miniature version of the refugee camps in Gaza and throughout Palestine. And so for me, when I'd see the videos of what was happening in Gaza, it's like I had been there and I'd never been to Gaza, but I had seen the exact thing in Lebanon, just a couple 100 kilometers north. And that was devastating. It took a lot of therapy for me personally to
Mm,
recover. It also took a lot of reframing the situation for myself. My therapist put it really well. She said, joy is resistance, the ability to laugh and to function and to be human in spite of catastrophe.
mm,
That is resistance. And I always tell folks who are in the activist space the same thing. It's okay to feel joy because that is an act of resistance. And at the same time, I have deliberately also tried to reduce my intake of social media and news content,
mhm,
not because I feel less responsible for bearing witness, because I feel like I have borne witness so significantly, but because I feel like I need to free up the mental space to act. And that has been quite healing for me personally. And that's why having Kindred Purpose Consultants as an avenue for me to act through has been an amazing joy and a healing journey for me, because now when I work with pro-Palestinian clients or organizations that are directly working in Palestine or directly working towards the liberation of Palestine or towards decolonial practices everywhere in the world, that for me, I am doing something about something that I feel is so deeply wrong with
yeah.
the world. So that has been fantastic, especially right now because we're working on a few different concurrent projects that work with newcomers and gender based violence towards newcomer women. And those are really heavy topics. And so I'm very deliberate about cultivating space for us to gather, space for us to talk, and space for us to debrief. And that's a
Mhm.
really important thing because when you're hearing these stories, even if you're reading about them, even if it's a secondhand thing, there is such a thing as secondhand trauma. And
Yep.
there's also the weight and the gravity of hearing about these really complex and really traumatic events for people. And that has been really important to be very mindful of and to also read the reactions on my team, to be careful
Mm,
of their body language. Am I seeing them as we discuss something potentially look a little bit upset? And I always circle back. It doesn't have to be in a group setting, but it needs circling back. I'm also really mindful that the world right now is just in general a really heavy space. And there's so much going on and a needless war and just a lot of the illusion of world order is just falling apart, and it's falling apart rapidly and drastically and catastrophically for so many people. And so many innocent lives lost everywhere, including children, unfortunately. And so I'm mindful to check in with my team. And I'm really lucky in that we've been working together for a while now that it's become a bit of a safe space and you're able to read each other better. And I think that's an important thing for collaboration and emotional well-being in a work environment. And I'm so grateful that we have that. And honestly, my team is phenomenal. I really can't brag about them enough because they're just such a joy to work with. And they have been a support system for me. And I hope that I am equally a support for them.
Yeah, I loved that idea of joy is resistance, the importance of checking in, and also taking the strategies and the steps that we need to take action. I know I've connected with many evaluators that are facing struggling with managing everything that's going on in our world and finding the purpose, finding the why, right? Amid all of this chaos. And I love the examples you gave of what has worked for you. And I think our audience is also going to benefit from that. The all of the your answer has really put emotions and the human experience at the center, which is something that I think in many workplaces, especially traditional workplaces, has often been labeled or put aside on the side of this is unprofessional, that doesn't belong here. How have you managed to turn that into one of your value propositions? When I read your website, that's how it came out for me. It's like this is one of your value propositions.
It's interesting because the training that I originally had in evaluation was the very you are a researcher, you are
Mhm.
distant from this, do not show emotion, keep a poker face. And it works for very cut and dry evaluations that are not
Mhm.
about people. It does not work the minute you are talking about serving people. And for context, so I started my very first evaluations were evaluations of like major R&D projects, several $100 million innovation programs. That's amazing. That's a believe it or not, as complex as the program is, as unemotional and dry as it can be. I love the programs, don't get me wrong. I actually learned a lot and I apply it constantly. I have a lot of general knowledge in these areas now. But I think that when we're talking about evaluations about programs serving communities, you cannot decenter the humanity from it. And part of that emotional piece is just honestly people watching and understanding the dynamics of humans and the complexities of humans. And even when you're not in evaluation and research mode, observing what are the different things. Like I mentioned, we're working on something related to gender based violence. For me, when I was taking that project on, I remembered being in a hospital in Ottawa back in early 2020. And at the time, I had a severe knee injury and I could not move. I was not mobile in this situation. But a woman walked into the hospital at triage and they don't have enough privacy. And this woman, she
Mhm.
came in and she was of a visible minority group. And she said, I need a rape kit. Sorry if this is triggering to anybody. I'm truly sorry. But she asked for a rape kit and she was denied twice by two of the registration nurses. And I could not get up. I could not do anything about that. And that broke my heart. And I carry that with me into this project right now because I want to make sure that if we're working on this, I'm not just thinking about the emotional side of things in terms of my direct engagement with communities to collect research. I'm also thinking about it as what's the person's journey when they experience something like this? What's the full scale of it? What are the different physical and emotional and systemic impacts that they face? And so I think that has really broadened our perspective from an evaluation sense, and it's allowed us to approach things so much more comprehensively. We're also not approaching research from here's a cut and dry, like cookie cutter approach to an evaluation. Everything is always tailored depending on the community that we're working with, depending on the circumstances. And if it needs to be tailored for language, I have conducted evaluations before as well in various languages. So I've conducted them in French, I've conducted them in Arabic. And that has been such a privilege to be able to do that. And what that has done is it gave people an option of speaking in their
Mhm.
language of choice. And it's so fascinating to me how much more enriching those conversations are if you're able to speak in their preferred language, because they open up more, they trust you more, they're more willing to express themselves a little bit more freely. For certain people, sometimes they'd start the interview in English and then say, "Can we switch to French at a certain point?" And I see like the quality of responses,
Mm.
just subjectively speaking, is just so completely different. And so for me, it's about being able to reach people where they are, how they currently are, and creating a safe enough space for them to be able to share that. And nothing is more gratifying for me than when somebody reaches out after an interview or a focus group and says, "Thank you for creating a safe space for me to be able to talk
Mhm.
about my experience." That is why I do what I do. And this is why I love evaluation so much.
That resonated a lot with actually my early experiences as an evaluator, also doing focus groups in Spanish and not only seeing the quality of the information, but actually allowing people for the very first time to participate because the language was so prohibited that they just wouldn't be part of any sort of data collection otherwise. And as you said, to me, like basically what I'm hearing is the way in which you use compassion and safe spaces and really centering emotions in how you approach your work really just makes you a better evaluator. So I really love that. Thanks for giving us all of those examples. So it's been almost a year since you've started this journey, and I'm very curious to hear what have you learned about leadership?
Oh my goodness. I have learned not just about leadership, but entrepreneurship, that it is a very humbling journey.
Mm.
You learn very quickly what you're good at, and you learn very quickly what you're not good at. And I think for the most part, I'd say I've always had a good amount of leadership skills. I've just had a lot of opportunities to grow those skill sets over time. So this isn't my first time managing a team, which I'm really thankful that I've managed teams before in really complex environments or managing projects. I think I do that well. I think what's interesting in this case is I'm very deliberate about how I'm structuring the team and
Mm.
how I'm assigning projects and how I am not just giving somebody the same type of evaluation work every single time because I want them to be exposed to different things. And I know you're doing the coaching right now, which is phenomenal. And I'm so proud of you for doing that. I think for me, I see a lot of junior evaluators approaching me and they're saying, "I'm stuck doing this same task
Yeah.
over and over again." And I don't want that for my team. I want them to be fully
Mhm.
well rounded across all the different methodologies, every aspect of project management. I want them to see that. I want them to be exposed to it. And gradually, I want them to own it. And
Mm.
that's an important piece for me of just, I feel responsible to not just give them work, I feel responsible to see them grow. And
Mm.
their growth to me is the most important thing. And if I'm not nurturing that or empowering that or recognizing when they're doing a fantastic job, then I'm not the leader that I want to be. And I also ask them for feedback. Quite honestly, I'm always like, "Is there something that I could do better? Can I help you with something?" Like, give me feedback because that helps me adapt and learn in real time as well. And it makes every project better than the last. And the other thing that I take from Brene Brown on this is clear is kind.
Mm.
And I try as much as I can to be very clear with my expectations, not to micromanage. I don't like to micromanage, but I try to set very clear expectations from the onset so that it enhances accountability and it also makes sure that they have a guidepost or something to help them along the way, as opposed to feeling like they're lost and they're too afraid to come. I don't want them ever to be afraid to come to me with any questions, but I try to preempt that. I'm giving
Mhm.
you the guidelines and then come back to me with questions and we will clarify and work together and touch base and all that kind of stuff. But that has been really important, especially as we've had like multiple concurrent projects. It's been really important to do that. And I've also learned that a growing business is a lot of work. So navigating a team of this size
Yes.
has been an interesting challenge as well. And I love it, but I'm definitely learning various things as well and trying to think about how do I structure Kindred Purpose Consultants for sustainability down the road, because I want us to be able to have this kind of impact with different organizations and different communities. And I want us to be able to do that sustainably without burning out the team, without me burning out. And I want us to be able to scale it responsibly and always center social impact. And that's a huge piece for us. And in fact, we're hoping, if we've got the capacity, shortly after our first year mark, we want to do an impact report to showcase like what we've accomplished over our first year, because it's been quite the journey. But I am proud of the impact we've achieved. We've worked with remarkable clients in Canada and around the world, and I'm so deeply proud of everything that we've done, and I'm so deeply proud of the team that's made this happen.
That's so amazing. Can't wait to see your impact report. I hope you do have time to make it happen, of course. And I love your vision of sustainability. And it's a good segue to my next question. What advice would you give to other women who are interested in starting this entrepreneurship journey in a way that is aligned with their values?
You have to start. You have to start, and you have to be out there, and you have to be willing to take calculated risks, and honestly, to bet on yourself. Betting on yourself is underrated, and it's such a challenge for a lot of people. And I know I kept on delaying this. Could have launched this 4 years ago. Like, I had a lot of people around me saying, just do it. And I was too scared, and I came up with a million excuses. And honestly, hearing your podcast helped, because it gave me a level of assurance that it's okay to do evaluation a little bit differently. There are so many different ways to approach it. And that was an important boost of confidence for me. So thank you for that. And at the same time, I think you learn so much by doing, like, you could spend years doing a business plan. And when you do that business plan, 6 months in, you might figure out that your ideal customer profile is completely wrong. And it's not what you actually want to do. And so in our case, for example, we recognized too broad of an ideal customer profile, and that wasn't working out for us. We stayed aligned with our values throughout, but we had to become a little bit more targeted with our approach, figure out which services we truly want to be offering, and narrow down and be very steadfast in how we're offering these services and maintaining consistent quality throughout. I wouldn't have ever found that out or been able to adapt and pivot if I wasn't in the doing phase. So everything is theoretical until you start doing. And honestly, doing is the best teacher. And I recommend that for everybody, even if you're starting small, even if it's from the side of your desk, even if it's 2 hours a night, just start with something and see where it goes. And you never know where it's going to take you. Like, your life a year from now could be completely different. My life right now is 180 degrees different than it was last year. And I'm just so excited for what the next year is going to bring. And I wouldn't have had this excitement or optimism had I not given this a shot.
I love that. Action is always the best way to build your confidence, to build momentum, and to learn really the best way. So I love that advice. As we wrap up, Doa, I'm curious to learn from you. What do you hope ahead for other evaluation organizations and for our field in general?
I wish for them courage, and I wish for them the clarity and conviction to be bold and holding on to their values, because so many of these organizations have the purest intentions. And I know, because I've spoken to so many of them. And I just want them to know it's okay to stick to your values and to hold on to those and go out and use that as your compass for taking on clients. Don't take on projects just for the sake of projects. Yes, you do need to pay the bills. You do need to make sure your team has work. That is important. But even in the small moments of making deliberate choices to align with your values, even in something as simple as procurement, like, the companies you choose to buy from are just as important of a big decision as it is to actually take on a project with a potential client. Just hold on to your values in every opportunity that you get as much as you can, and just see where life's going to take you. And I promise it's going to pay off in big ways and in so many ways. and you just have to wait and see.
Thank you for that and for sharing throughout this episode how it's paid for you. And we can't wait to see. I'm talking on behalf of the audience as well. Can't wait to see where you take your business next. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing so much of your journey and your story and your approach. I've learned so much from you, and I can't wait to connect with you again.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for having me.